It is so fabulous to connect with you this way, Fred. Thank you for taking time to interview, and welcome to our Learn to Listen series.
Yes, thank you for having me. Of course, I'm very excited, and I love this subject matter. This is something I think I share with you that speaks directly to my heart. I mean, as it should all believers, of course, but I think it's a majorly important subject matter, especially for the times that we're living in, and going forward. So, thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you. So I'd love for you to share a bit about just who you are, some of your background in dance. I mean, I'm so fascinated by the opportunities God's provided for you, and just weaving that in with faith, and then we'll hop into some questions.
Okay. Yes. Well, as you know, my testimony could take a whole a couple of days, but I mean, the snapshot of it, especially as it relates to dance, has been that since the time I was a kid, my earliest memories of really connecting with music and movement were probably when I was around the third grade. And that's when I so vividly recall falling in love with music and movement. And I remember that so specifically, feeling and hearing the music and feeling it in my body. And all the dancers and choreographers can relate, to that experience. And from that time, I knew that my pathway was connected to both music and movement. And so I began freestyle dancing in my room. And at the time, hip hop culture came into the culture, and I fell in love specifically with hip hop culture and the music. And what really intrigued me was rhythm. So my body responds to rhythm and percussion. So rhythmic music, bass and drums, they're like buttons and signals inside me that when I hear them, it does something. So from the time I was a kid, I knew that. So I basically would go into my room and I would put on music and I would freestyle for hours and hours. And then I fell in love with breakdancing. So my early start was as a breakdancer. And who knows, I was probably just rolling around on the floor or on the ground thinking I was like doing epic moves. But it worked, and so then basically my trajectory after that was I was like fascinated with music video culture. And so I would watch TV and I'd watch these music videos and I'd be learning choreography from the music videos. And what I really loved was the storytelling that existed in a lot of the music videos. And some of them were simple stories with loose, themes, and some of them were like more elaborate, like conceptualized videos. And I knew from a kid, like, that's what I want to do. I want to create works of art combining movement and music and acting and media. And so basically then I just pursued a professional career in hip hop dance. So then I became, snapshot going forward, a commercial hip hop dancer. I did music videos and commercials, television shows. I was on one of the first real big MTV dance-based game shows when I was 15 years old, and we won the whole thing, which was really fun. And that really kind of set my heart to like, okay, this is where I want to do. So it was up until about the time I was 19 when I had gotten saved, when I gave my life to Christ. And up until that point, like I said, I was doing commercials, music videos, pursuing all of that, and I was teaching. I started professionally teaching hip hop dance since I was 17 years old. And I really started to fall in love with teaching and equipping others in the movement. And mostly because I experienced what it did for me on all levels, from an artistic level to a spiritual level to a social, emotional level, because that's really the power of movement, is that it actually affects the whole entire being. And so I began teaching and I did that. And then I gave my life to Christ. and I shared this with you, I had a crossroads moment then where I couldn't find that intersection, or I didn't believe and didn't know that there was an intersection between faith, Christianity, and hip hop dance, which was my background. That was what I was, doing. And so I was on my knees weeping, because to me, the scale was the kingdom of God and hip hop dance. And to me, the greatest thing was the kingdom. And I knew that from the moment I had given my life to Christ, is this is the greatest thing above everything. And so if these things don't align, you're going to have to choose which one you want to pursue. And it was a no-brainer in that way. It's like, oh, well, the kingdom is the greatest thing, so I'm going to pursue that. But then this is my passion. This is my vocation. This is the thing since I was a kid that I've dreamed about. I've seen visions of, my heart was connected to. And so I literally had a sorrow of loss, like a grieving, like I am surrendering this and letting this go forever. And in that, when I felt like I really surrendered it all over to God, it was literally in that moment that I heard the voice of the Lord say, "Thank you, Fred. Now let me show you what the true power and the true purpose of movement is." And from that moment forward to this day, and specifically those next 3 months, I had this incredible encounters with the Lord where just revelation and wisdom and writing and all kinds of experiences, dreams, visions, amazing encounters with the Lord that basically proved what he said he would promise to do, which would be to show me the true power and purpose of movement. Because up until that point, I knew it as entertainment. I knew what it was for me, my love, my enjoyment, but I also, being part of the entertainment world, entertainment industry, knew that the power of it for entertainment purposes. And basically, in a nutshell, the Lord revealed, like, hey, it is those things, but it is also the power to transform people's lives. Basically, everything in Isaiah 61, that the Spirit of the Lord is upon us. He has anointed us to preach the good news, to set the captives free, all of that. If you just want to look at the list of things that honestly, all of us are called to do in any vocation, is all there in Isaiah 61. As to the why. Now, as to the what, that depends on what your assignment is, what he's called you to do. But as to the why, it's all there, because we're gifted for works of service. Our gifts, our callings are not for us selfishly, but they're actually gifts to serve others with. And in that, and in God's goodness, we get blessed by it and we enjoy it. But it actually is called to bless others. So
that's fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, you're inspiring me. I think I want to do a little series just called Conversions. But challenge the listeners, I mean, the people to share, to be able to just, just like, this is my conversion story, and here another dancer, another artist, another artist, and another artist. I'm sure there's probably something out there that exists, but yours, we don't even get to that part of your story because, wow, floating down the aisle. I mean, it's a beautiful one. It's a gorgeous story. So evidently you've had to listen to God. You've had to just create and open up a listening ear and a listening heart. And as we know, dance takes discipline. So I'd love for you to share about that. How have you cultivated a discipline of listening to God? And, and for dancers, that can be our bodies, right? It can be our imagination, our thoughts, our heart. Just, I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, in preparation for this, I thought this would be funny to show you. Okay. These are stacks of notebooks. These are all notebooks that are filled with God's instructions to me. And literally, he's speaking constantly. And if I open up one of these books, there'll be a date that has an idea, or pieces of paper that are littered with instructions, or through prayer time, God speaking. And I wanted to, I wanted to say this, that God is still speaking from the time in Genesis. So if we wanted to look at some evidence biblically, in Genesis 1 and 2, the earth was formless and void, and then God spoke. He spoke, and then the world was created. And in that speech, when he spoke, was all the ingredients necessary for life in the earth and everything that we need. And I want to drop this. I love this. This is like one of my other favorite scriptures, which is in Isaiah 55:11. This is all connected to it. It says, "So it is when I declare something, my word will go out and not return to me empty, but it will do what I wanted. It will accomplish what I determined." So the snapshot version of that is, his word will not return void. It will accomplish the thing that it was set forth in the earth to do. And of course, Jesus was the word that became flesh and dwelt among us, and he fulfilled his assignment. And I believe that all of us on the earth, and as we relate to dancers, that God is speaking to you about your assignment, and he's already spoken it to you, and his word will not return void, meaning the thing that you were called and created to do. Jeremiah 29:11, I knew you before you were in your mother's womb. I formed you. I had plans for you. So the thing that you were called to do, God is for that being accomplished in the earth. And the way that we connect to that is by listening to his voice so that we know what to do. Okay, so here's another cool thing, because this is part of the discipline to your question, is how do we hear his voice? How do you discipline yourself? You have to read his word. You have to pray and have time reading the Bible, because it is the word that's available to us. So here's what John, I love this one in John. It talks about my sheep. So this is John 10:5 and 10:27. So John 10:5 says, the sheep would not be willing to follow a stranger. So I know the voice of the Lord, and the voice of a stranger I will not follow. And in 27, it says, my sheep respond as they hear my voice. I know them intimately, and they follow me. I give them a life that is unceasing, and death will not have the last word. No one will steal them from my hand. So God goes on to say over and over, like, I've given you my voice. I'm for you, not against you. I'm speaking to you. And when you learn to hear my voice, you're going to learn all that you need for life. And so part of, I'm still continually learning. I think that's the beautiful thing. And what actually makes our faith relationship so dynamic and so alive is that we never stop growing. Like, I'm continually learning. And the way that God spoke to me early on when I first got saved is not how he speaks to me now. I mean, all the ingredients are there. And I shared a little bit of this with you, which is, he started out training me in little assignments. So first it was little things like, hey, Fred, I want you to go over there and tell that person that Jesus really loves them. And I was a new believer. So I'm like, no, they're going to think like, get away from me, you weirdo, all that. And so it was the same pattern every time. God would put something on my heart, go do this. And then when I did it, I would find that the response was always that the other person was blessed or positively impacted by it. So, and they were little assignments that didn't cost me much except for my obedience. And in that, I began to put the puzzle together that, oh, God speaks, and he speaks for the blessing of others, and he asks us to carry it out in the earth. And you know that it's him when the result is for the good of others and not for the harm of others. And so that's how he trained me to hear his voice. And now, of course, he speaks to me the same way, but uses different tools. And the thing is, he knows us intimately, so he knows how to get us to hear his voice and understand. And as a dancer, and I share with you, and a choreographer, I'm very sensitive to movement and music and sound. And so he'll use those things in order to teach you, in order to have you listen. So for those of you listening to this, I just want you to know that God is speaking to you even now, and he knows you intimately, and he knows how you will hear him. So if you're feeling a tugging on him, then listen and respond. So, so that I would say as a structured instruction is to make sure that you're spending time with God, praying and reading the Bible, which of course seems so simple, but the Bible is, the Word of God is living and active. So it's not simple. It's always dynamic and it's always fresh.
That is so, I love that, and how you articulated in particular at the end, because sometimes I know personally for me, but also when I am talking to other people, a part of the hang up is that I feel like it's all my responsibility to listen and try to figure it all out, but I forget the kindness of God that he knows my language. He knows how he's going to best commune with me. And for us to, and we know as believers that the Spirit is working on our behalf. There's these utterances, there's this, fighting for us to stay in relationship with God, and God's wooing us. And so I really appreciate that perspective, that he knows us, and so he's going to speak our language. And obviously there's times where we have to learn God's language too, and it's going to challenge us and stir us to greater faithfulness. But it's that familiarity of him knowing us and us knowing him. It's like all the time. It just blows my mind. It's like, oh my God, you're oh God.
Yeah, and it's always that balance too of like faith and works. Like the Bible is clear, faith without works is dead, but neither one should be only pursued. If you're only works and you're striving and you're doing all this thing to hear God and do for God, then God's like, that's not the complete picture. And then if you're only faith and you're just like all day long, I'm just waiting to hear it, like that doesn't work either. It's actually this dynamic combination and tension of both. And it's like that's what I've been through the whole gamut multiple times, as I'm sure that all of us have, but it's true, and it's what makes the relationship alive.
Yes, good. So another part of this conversation is looking at not only developing, cultivating, learning how to listen, but just just the qualities of leadership. So yes, a good leader is a good listener, but what other qualities in leadership do you value and esteem and admonish others to, not necessarily strive towards, but to try to obtain?
Yeah. For me, it's two words, and they're kind of intersected, which is humility and wisdom. And those are the two. I think of Solomon. I think asking the Lord, saying, "You can have whatever you want. What do you want?" And he said, "Give me wisdom so I can lead these people." And God's response is, "Great. Since you asked that thing and not the other things, I'm going to give you that, and I'm going to give you all these other things." And so that's not a formula that we can abuse and say, "Okay, great. Well, I'll just sort of pretend to ask God for this because I really want this." But it's the reality of the humility of going, I don't know everything, and I've been given the platform to be a leader in whatever capacity, because I believe we're all in some capacities, always in operational leadership. But humility is like the number one. I mean, Jesus said, "The greatest among you will be your servant." And I think servanthood is different than what we might think it is. Servanthood doesn't mean that we're doormats and just like, "Oh, well, I'm here to serve you, so I'll just be a doormat." No, I mean, unless God says, "Hey, I want you to be a doormat for this reason," but there's always going to be a greater purpose assigned to that will be in the end. So the servant is really a position of the heart of like, oh, I've been given this position, these gifts, these assignments as a service unto others. And so asking for wisdom now is a key component. And then the humility, and the humility also comes in with realizing that to see yourself appropriately. And the scripture says that clearly, just to not think of yourself more highly than you ought to. And then the opposite is true, to not think of yourself so lowly. And I think artists and creatives have the biggest struggle with this because we are sensitive people. We are made to be sensitive. Like if we're not sensitive in our emotions and all of those things, then how can we hear and feel the music? How can we, like, we're literally as artists more sensitive, I believe, than others, because it's connected to being able to be sensitive to God's spirit and to the things he's called us to. Otherwise, you know, we can tune out things, but we're not called to tune out. We're actually called to tune in, and then take that, what we received, and then replicate it out, either through teaching others or demonstrating it in a beautiful performance. Like, that's how we're wired. And so that's why I feel like artists sometimes have that biggest challenge with comparison, because we're watching everything around us. And so we're subject to the ebbs and flows of great exploits of others, and then comparing, should I be doing that? Why aren't, like, all of those things which are natural to the human experience. And that's where I think seeing yourself appropriately is like, hey, we're one body with many parts. And that's where it goes back to listening to God. Like, that's great. That looks shiny. That looks a lot like what I feel I'm called to do. But is that what I'm called to do? Just because it looks like it, let me listen and let me ask God, what am I supposed to do? And I think that is sometimes a great course correction, and why listening to God is so important, because I think it can be easy, especially for sensitive people, to go that way. So I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. It's so great. It's just a great perspective, and especially tapping into the artist mentality or the artist temperament as well. You know, we have that tendency to be a little more, I don't know, necessarily fragile, but melancholic, or just in touch with our feelings, emotions. And so it's a good word, good counsel.
Yeah. And I believe that that's on purpose. I believe it's on purpose. Now, it's not something that you can just run with and make as an excuse, of course, you know, just like, but it is on purpose. And so again, that's where your walk and your faith walk comes in. That's where listening to the Lord comes in, you know, where he might just say, get up, that's enough. Get up and go and do what I told you to do, you know. So
we've got to be ready.
Yeah.
We got to be ready for that. That is so beautiful. So with these wonderful things, you know, learning to listen and gaining these different skill sets, how do you feel like God's just really moving in the world today? Is what you have seen as an artist, and you've been in the industry and you've been in the kingdom. Just how do you feel like God's moving in the arts?
Honestly, I feel like we're in a great awakening stage. And probably if we look back through history, maybe everyone has said that, you know, maybe at each appointed time, and that may be the truer thing, is that each appointed time, those who were called to live in that time and who created the Reformation or revival in those areas felt that same thing. It's like, okay, well, there is an awakening happening, and I play a role in that. And I do feel like that. And I think specifically for the arts, I believe he's waking up his body of Christ to step into the fullness of the arts, like the fullness of dance, of acting, of music, of visual arts, of painting, of media, of film. I think that historically what has happened, and unfortunately, is that at times those things, those arts and those gifts became forms of idolatry, and they became things that became worshipped, like the word says, like they worship the created things and not the creator. And I think because of that, things got shut down, you know, like, you know, good, well-meaning people, church institutions shut that down. Oh, that looks like this, we're going to shut that down, we're going to shut that down. And so I believe what's happening now is everyone is waking up to a stronger revelation of not just the power of the arts, but actually their appropriate role. And I believe God's hand is on the permission. And even we're seeing like churches open up permission for forms of art that wouldn't have been on the stage or the platform or the altar before, that are now being on the altar and being on stages. Of course, with that requires responsibility, requires discipleship and responsibility. And this is where leaders and teachers come in to help guide those into those truths. And that's where I feel, in a snapshot, I feel like we're waking up to the power of media. We're waking up to the power of movement. We're waking up to the power of the arts for kingdom purposes. And I think that is the bigger switchover. And I think at the same time, God is starting to raise up leaders and teachers who will help to equip those who are now realizing, oh, this can happen. I mean, my personal testimony is I didn't think you could be a hip hop dancer and be a Christian, or that hip hop dance or music could be something that God would use and utilize. Now, there's a lot more to that statement, because, you know, there's certain language or music or movements that I would say I don't personally believe that line up with the value system of the kingdom of God. And I think that's cross-genre, has nothing to do with hip hop. I think any movements, you know, like, again, it's the heart posture and it's the assignment that God has called you to, and the responsibility to know, right? So, yeah. So I would say, I hope that answered the question. I kind of got a little excited there.
No, I mean, it just gives a global perspective. But I think sometimes we don't, as artists, want to take on the responsibility.
Yeah.
We want to allow creative juices to flow. We want to place our art out there, but not take ownership and responsibility for what weight that might have, or you know, even the download from God. What are we going to do with that? It's not something passive. And so how is God moving? And I've heard it from other friends, and just seeing it in the industry as well, that people want some different types of experiences, and they want authentic encounters. And we know that God provides the most authentic encounter that anybody could ever have in a personal relationship. So how to disseminate that in word and deed, and how to disseminate that understanding, and you know, just encourage a seeking for that through our artful demonstrations.
Yeah.
So what else in closing? How else would you encourage leaders? What else would you like to share from us? Because I know there's nugget after nugget after nugget in there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, and kind of even piggybacking off of what you just said, like, this is sort of one of my biggest pet peeves, and Lord knows, forgive me, I've probably been guilty of this myself at some point or points, but the biggest thing I would say is in Romans 12:2, offer your body as a living sacrifice. But here's the part that I want to emphasize: do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And of course, the finish of that is, then you will be able to test and see and prove what the will of God is. So going back into listening, how can you actively listen and hear God, what God is saying? If you get that download of creativity, if you are like seeking, you know, an expansion of a creative voice, it still needs to run through the filter of who God is. You know, remember that we are sensitive and we are creative, and we're constantly influenced by everything around us. So that doesn't mean that we go unchecked or untamed and just start accepting everything and calling everything God and godly. Like, it still needs to filter through his kingdom and his word. And the thing that I've probably seen so often, which is an encouragement to all of you out there is do not conform to the patterns of this world. We do not need to rely on the world system that's already set up and its version of creativity, of dance, of music, of all that, to then decide how we get to do our Christian art. We are tapped into the Most High, the Creator, the one who created creativity. So why are we defaulting or bowing down to a lesser form of creativity that was not sponsored by him? We should be listening to God and hearing, getting the downloads from heaven, and then what we put out should not look like anything else that we've seen, or it should have elements that are familiar, but have the kingdom. And I'll say this, John 17:16 says, you are in the world, but you are not of it. The reality is we are in the world, and we do have to function in it. I mean, Jesus, when he was on his time on the earth, he spoke to the fishermen in language that they understood. He spoke in parables that the farmers understood. He used the language of the day to reveal spiritual things. And I believe as artists, that's also our position. Like, I think it's important to be trained. Absolutely, 100%. You should be getting trained in your art. Just like a pastor would get up onto the pulpit, that you want them to know the word, know the Bible, and that's important. The same thing is true for dancers and students and upcoming dancers and leaders and teachers. Like, we should be trained. You should be trained in your art form and in the physical discipline, but also the spiritual discipline of your art. And I believe that, for example, it's okay to learn to use the tools like breakdancing, pirouettes, leaps. All of these are language. They're language. Movement is a language. So be disciplined in effectively using the language, but be disciplined in the spirit so that you know what to say through that language, so that you can actively know what is God wanting to say through this language, right? I don't speak other languages. I'm Italian, but unfortunately I don't speak Italian. But I could go to another country and I could minister and I could do the work of the Lord without speaking the language to some degree. But if I learn the language, then what I do is even more effectual. Like it has even more power because I'm speaking the same language. So as dancers, we do need to be trained in the language of movement so that when God says, hey, I want you to create this work of art, this piece, and I want you to use these languages, we know what to do. We're equipped to be able to do that. And it's one of the things I feel personally called to, is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, to equip them through books, through teaching, through workshops, through choreography, through film, through television, all of these things, so that they can be equipped for the work of the ministry. I think the other thing I wrote down into that question is like, you want to have both a physical discipline and spiritual discipline. So what you're saying is in alignment with the kingdom of heaven, not the kingdom of this world. And if we look at the example of Jesus, he said, I only do what I see my Father. I only say what I see my Father do. He spoke, he did according to the pattern that already existed in heaven. And so that alignment of what to do was connected to him listening to the Father. And so that is a major secret.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and I love how God is so gracious to us to give the example of his son in human form, that we don't have to just try to model after this ethereal, sometimes seemingly, just invisible aspiration, but we've got Jesus speaking these words and doing these amazing acts. And yeah, again, it just comes back to the things I'm really hearing you articulate. It's taking the responsibility, and it's that balance of, yes, I need to be responsible, I need to be focused, I need to be serious, But if we're just so driven like that and we don't enjoy the art that we're making, or if we don't enjoy God's beauty, like looking at the flowers behind you when we first got on, I was like, oh, those are so gorgeous. And what an amazing wife you have that you said is, gives the touch of the beauty. So it is that balance of receiving and giving, that balance of just reveling in God's beauty, but also being responsible for the gifts that He's given us and allowing Him to continue to create beauty in and through us. So it's amazing. It's just, I'm so honored, both to be a believer artist, but also just be in this kingdom with you. I can't wait until we can be in proximity together and have you out in our neck of the woods and get a little bit more of a physical, tangible, connection with you. But I sure appreciate your time and just your words of wisdom. And I'm looking forward. We're going to have some other activities coming up in the near future. So I'd love for your voice to continue to be that which encourages and edifies and inspires, because He's put a lot in you, and it's very evident that you are holding it, but also generously giving back out. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, the same to you. The fact that you're doing this series and all the things that you're doing, it's like-mindedness. I mean, both operating in the way of like God has given something to you, and it's not just for you, and you're aware of that. And so you're finding platforms and ways to be able to communicate that out and to share that, because in the end, the gospel has to reach the ends of the earth, and we're all a part of it, and we all play a role, and there's room for everyone. Yes. The kingdom is that big, His body is that big, like we all have a role to play. And the fun thing is that He wants it to happen.
He does. And there's so much more yet to come. Where we are in this recording, when people listen to this, they won't probably put it even in context in months and years ahead. It's like COVID, what was that? Oh, I remember that. But during these days, we really are looking forward to what is yet to come on the, breaking through to the outside. And but the words you're sharing are timeless. So thank you very much, Fred. Appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you.
All right. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.